Zora stood alone in the middle of a destroyed village. The once beautiful homes were now rubble, broken by the relentless fighting that had torn through her planet. She had tried everything to get help, but no one listened to her cries. Not her. People, not even the leaders who were supposed to protect them. She was nothing but a forgotten voice in a sea of chaos, her species. The Valkyra were strong, proud, and always victorious. They valued power above all else. To them, weakness was a crime, and those who were weak were often left behind. Zora had always known she wasn't like the others. She didn't care about power. She cared about helping others, especially the ones who were suffering. But that made her an outcast. For weeks she had gone to the council, pleading for them to listen. She begged for them to stop the violence, to focus on saving their people instead of fighting. But the council had ignored her. They saw her as weak, as someone who didn't understand the way of the world. After all, they were warriors, and war was their way of life. "You're wasting your time," one of the council members had told her, his voice cold. "Go back to your corner and leave the real decisions to those who know how to lead." The words had stung, but they were nothing new. Zora had been pushed aside for as long as she could remember. Her cries for help were drowned out by the sound of warships and the roar of weapons. Now, standing in the midst of destruction, she felt smaller than ever. The cries of the injured, the sick, and the hungry filled the air, but no one seemed to care. The Valkyra had always been focused on conquest, and now they had forgotten their people. Zora's heart sank as she watched a group of children huddled together, their eyes wide with fear. They were alone, abandoned by their families, left to fend for themselves in the aftermath of the fighting. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. "They won't listen," she whispered to herself. "None of them will." Just then, a figure appeared from the shadows, walking steadily toward her. It was a soldier, who had been sent to help with the peacekeeping mission. She had seen him before, but they had never spoken. He was a stranger, just like the rest of them. The soldier stopped a few feet away from her, his gaze soft and kind. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Zora didn't know why he was here, but she didn't feel the need to explain herself too. Him, everyone had already heard her, and still no one cared. "You're the one who keeps calling for help, aren't you?" the soldier asked gently. Zora nodded, her throat tight. "Yes," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But no one listens. They don't care about the people who are suffering. All they care about is war." The soldier looked at her for a long time, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Zora thought he might turn away, like everyone else had done. But instead, he took a step closer and knelt down to her level. His eyes met hers, and in that moment, Zora felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. "I'm listening," the soldier said quietly. The words were simple, yet they meant everything to Zora. For the first time in as long as she could remember, someone was truly listening to her. The soldier didn't offer empty promises or pretend to understand her pain. He just listened. Zora felt her emotions rise, a mixture of relief and disbelief. Could it be possible? Could a human truly care? She had been taught all her life that humans were nothing but distant and cold. Soldiers in a far-off galaxy who only cared about their own kind. Yet here he was, listening to her when no one else would. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why would you listen to me?" "No one else does." And soldier hesitated, then stood up, looking out over the village. "'Cause everyone deserves to be heard," he said simply. "No one should have to suffer in silence." Those words struck Zora like a lightning bolt. She had spent so long fighting for attention, for her voice to be heard. But she had never heard anyone speak with such understanding. It was as if this human understood her pain in a way no one else ever could. "My name's Daniel," the soldier said, offering her a small smile, "and I'm here to help." Zora felt a tear slip down her cheek, but it wasn't from sadness. It was from the relief of knowing that, at least for a moment, she wasn't alone. Someone cared. Someone listened. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Thank you for hearing me." Daniel nodded, his expression kind. "You're not alone," he said quietly. "We'll fix this together." As Zora looked into his eyes, she saw something she had never seen before: hope. For the first time, she believed that things could change. And it all started with someone who simply listened. Zora had never expected much from anyone. Growing up among the Valkyra, she was taught to be strong, to be tough, to never show weakness. She was told that the only way to survive was to fight, to prove her worth. But here with Daniel, things were different. His words, so simple and kind, had given her something she hadn't felt in years: hope. For the first time, she believed someone could understand. He wasn't just a soldier following orders. He was someone who saw her as more than just a cry for help, saw her as a person. Zora wiped her face with the sleeve of her tattered tunic, trying to push the emotions down. She couldn't afford to let herself be vulnerable. Not now. There was too much at stake. But as she looked at Daniel, standing there with his gentle smile, she felt something shift inside her. Maybe things didn't have to be the way they always had been. "We need to do something," Zora said, her voice steadier now. "My people are suffering, and they won't listen. But I can't stand by anymore. I can't watch them die without trying to help." Daniel nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know," he said, "but it's going to take more than just you and me. It'll take everyone. We need to get the leaders to listen, or nothing will change." Zora glanced around. The wreckage. The village that had once been a bustling home was now nothing more than ruins. Smoke still curled from broken buildings, and the cries of the injured filled the air. She could feel the weight of her people's pain, the silent suffering that no one seemed to care about. "I've tried," Zora whispered, the guilt rising again. "I've been to the council. I've begged them to do something, but they just pushed me aside. They don't care about the weak." Daniel stepped closer. "To her, they care about power," he said softly. "Maybe we can make them see something else. Maybe we can show them that true strength isn't in fighting or domination. It's in helping those who can't help themselves." Zora's eyes narrowed. For a moment, she thought of her people, her strong, proud people, and how their hearts had turned cold. They had always believed that only the strong could survive, but now their strength was only causing destruction. But then she thought of the humans of Daniel, and the kindness he had shown her. Could it be possible? Could she really change the minds of her people? Could she make them see that there was more to life than power? "I'll do whatever it takes," Zora said firmly, her voice growing stronger. "I won't stop fighting. For them, even if they won't listen, I'll make them see." Daniel smiled again. "I'm with you," he said. "We'll do it together." The next few days passed quickly as Daniel and Zora worked side by side. Daniel used his position as a peacekeeper to gather information, speaking with the human council and military officials. Zora, meanwhile, tried to find other Valkyra who might be willing to join her cause. But most of them were either too afraid to stand up against the warlords, or they simply didn't care. The Valkyra had always been a proud people, and their pride was their greatest weakness. But Zora didn't give up. She spoke to anyone who would listen, no matter how few. Slowly, the whispers of her cause began to spread. More Valkyra, tired of the endless war and the destruction it had brought, began to gather in secret. They met in hidden corners of the shattered villages, listening to Zora's words. And for the first time, they began to believe that change might be possible. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the wreckage, Zora and Daniel stood outside the ruins of a small house. Zora's heart was heavy, but her resolve was clear. She had a plan now. They had to confront the council once again to make them see that there was more to life than their power struggles. She couldn't do it alone, but with Daniel by her side. She knew they stood a chance. "I'm ready," Zora said, her voice steady but full of determination. "Tomorrow, we go to the council again. But this time, I won't let them silence me." Daniel looked at her with respect in his eyes. "You've got this," he said quietly. "We both do." Zora nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. She had never thought of herself as a leader, but now she felt the responsibility that came with it. She was the voice for those who had none. She was the hope for those who had none. As they turned to leave, Zora glanced over her shoulder at the ruins once again. It was hard to imagine how things could ever change, but she couldn't stop now. She had to try. They walked into the night, their footsteps echoing in the silence of the broken world around them. Zora wasn't sure what would happen next, but one thing was certain: she would no longer be the one who was ignored. Her voice would be heard, and maybe, just maybe, the galaxy would start listening too. The morning came quickly, and with it, a sense of determination. Zora had never felt this focused in her life. The night before, she and Daniel had made plans, preparing to face the council once again. This time, she wouldn't be the Yuiet, alien hiding in the shadows. She was ready to make them listen. Zora stood in front of a cracked mirror, adjusting her simple tunic. Her appearance no longer mattered, but her heart raced with the weight of what she was about to do. She wasn't just speaking for herself anymore. She was speaking for the countless others who had been silenced, abandoned, and forgotten. This was her chance to change everything. Daniel stood next to her, his uniform clean but worn, a reminder of the long hours he had spent trying to make the humans see the truth. He was ready too. In the quiet before the storm, they exchanged a brief look. Neither of them needed words. They both knew what was at stake. "Are you ready?" Daniel asked, his voice soft but firm. Zora nodded. "Ready as I'll ever be." Together, they walked toward the council's chamber. The heavy doors loomed ahead, guarded by soldiers who barely glanced at them. Zora knew the council wasn't expecting her, and that was exactly why she had to be there. If she waited for permission, she would never be heard. As they stepped inside, Zora felt a cold chill wash over her. The council members sat high above, looking down at them from their towering chairs. The room was quiet, too quiet, and the eyes of the Valcora elders studied her with disdain. Zora had been here before, many times, but this time felt different. She wasn't the quiet girl anymore. She wasn't the one who begged for mercy. Today, she was standing tall, ready to make them hear her voice, the leader of the council. A tall, imposing figure named Varric was the first to speak. His voice was low and powerful, like thunder in a storm. "Zora," he said, his eyes narrowing. "What is this? You know you have no place here. We are discussing matters of war, matters of importance. Your pleas for peace are irrelevant."
Zora
felt a knot in her stomach. This was what she had expected. The council would dismiss her again. They would ignore her and treat her like a child. But she was done with being ignored. "I am not here to beg," Zora said, her voice clear and steady. "I'm here to speak for those who cannot. I'm here for the people who have been forgotten, the people who are dying because of this endless war." Varric scoffed, a sneer curling on his lips. "Your people are weak. They are nothing. This war is the only way forward." Zora's hands clenched into fists. She could feel her anger rising, but she fought to keep it under control. "You're wrong," she said, her voice growing louder. "This war is destroying everything. It's tearing us apart. I've seen it with my own eyes. The children, the sick, the elders, they are all suffering because of your pride." For a moment there was silence in the room. The council members exchanged looks, unsure of how to respond. But Zora wasn't finished. She had come this far, and she wasn't backing down now. "You sit here in your comfortable seats, making decisions without ever seeing what's happening on the ground," Zora continued. "You don't hear the cries of the ones who are losing everything. You don't know what it's like to watch your people starve and suffer while you fight for power." Daniel stepped forward, standing beside her. His presence gave her strength. He was human, and his people weren't even involved in the conflict. But here he was, standing with her, ready to fight for a cause that wasn't his own. "Zora speaks the truth," Daniel said, his voice calm but firm. "I've seen the destruction. With my own eyes, I've seen the people you claim to protect, and they are dying. You can't keep ignoring them." The council shifted uneasily. For the first time, the Valcora were hearing the truth they had been avoiding. Some of the members shifted in their seats, uncomfortable with the words they were hearing. Zora could see doubt beginning to creep into their eyes, and for a brief moment she felt a spark of hope. Maybe this time, they would listen. Varric's eyes flicked from Zora to Daniel, his face hardening. "And what do you suggest, human?" he sneered. "That we abandon everything we fought for? That we throw away our strength for the weak?" Zora didn't flinch. "I'm not asking you to abandon anything," she said firmly. "I'm asking you to see that strength doesn't come from fighting and destroying. Strength comes from protecting those who need it most. You can still lead. But you must lead with compassion, not fear." The room fell silent. Zora felt the weight of the council's gaze upon her, and for a moment, she was afraid they would throw her out, just like they had done so many times before. But then something unexpected happened. One of the council members, an older woman, with silver hair, stood. Her name was Nava, and she had always been a quiet observer. Zora had never spoken to her directly, but she had always respected the wisdom in Nava's eyes. Perhaps there is something to what they are saying, Nava said softly, her voice carrying a quiet authority. "Maybe we have been too focused on power for too long. Maybe it is time we listen." Zora's heart skipped a beat. This was the moment. She couldn't let it slip away. "We have to change," Zora said, her voice filled with urgency. "We don't. We will lose everything. But if we work together, if we fight for those who need us, we can rebuild." The council members exchanged looks, some still unsure, but others beginning to nod. For the first time in a long while, Zora saw a glimmer of hope in their eyes. It wasn't over yet, but Zora had made her mark. She had spoken her truth, and the council had listened, and for the first time it felt like they might finally be ready. To change, the days following the council meeting felt like a whirlwind. Zora had hoped for change, but she hadn't expected it to happen so quickly. The council's reaction had been mixed, but Nava's words had sparked something within the Valcora people. There was talk now, whispers of a different way forward. Zora couldn't believe it, but the glimmer of hope was stronger than ever. Daniel stayed by her side through it all. He had been a steady source of support, helping her organize the discussions and meetings with other leaders. The humans, too, had begun to take notice. It wasn't just about peacekeeping anymore. It was about change. And that change, for the first time, seemed possible. Zora couldn't help but marvel at the way things were shifting. A few days ago, she had been dismissed as weak and foolish. Now, people were coming to her, asking for guidance. The very council that had ignored her before now wanted to hear her ideas. The warlords who had once seen her as nothing more than an inconvenience were beginning to take her seriously. But despite the progress, Zora knew there was still much work to be done. There were many among the Valcora who still believed in the old ways, the ways of power and conquest. The warlords weren't going to give up their grip on control so easily, and Zora knew that if she wasn't careful, everything she had worked for could come crashing down. "Do you think it's really happening?" Zora asked, her voice filled with both hope and doubt as she stood beside Daniel. Looking out over the valley where the Valkyra camped, Daniel glanced at her, his face thoughtful. I don't know. But I do know that change doesn't come easy. It's going to take more than just words. You've already inspired some of the people. Now, we need to reach the ones who are still holding on to the old ways." Zora nodded. She understood. She had seen the way some of the council members had looked at her when she spoke, the skepticism still lingering in their eyes. There was no way they would let go of their power without a fight. But she couldn't stop now. She had come too far. The next morning, Zora was summoned to another council meeting. This time, the atmosphere was different. The room was quieter, and the air felt thick with tension. She wasn't sure if it was a good sign or not, but she knew one thing. She couldn't back down. She had to keep pushing for change, even if it meant standing alone. As Zora entered the council chamber, she was met with a sea of faces, some familiar, some new. The council members sat at their high tables, looking down at her as they had before. But now, there was a flicker of curiosity in their eyes. They were waiting for her to speak, but Zora wasn't sure if she was ready for the challenge. Nava was the first to speak, her voice soft but steady. "Zora, we've heard the voices of many who have supported your cause. The human soldier has made an impact as well, but there are still questions. There are still doubts. Zora took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. I understand your doubts, she said, her voice calm. But the truth is, the way we've been doing things hasn't worked. We've been focused on power, on war, and look where it's gotten us. Our people are suffering. We're losing more than we're gaining, and the only way forward is to change our approach. Varek, the council leader, leaned forward, his sharp eyes fixed on her. And what do you propose? We abandon our way of life? Throw away our strength? Zora felt the familiar sting of his words, but she didn't flinch. I'm not asking you to throw away our strength. I'm asking you to use it for something better. We don't have to keep fighting to prove ourselves. We can lead through compassion, through understanding. We can still be strong, but we must also be wise. There was a long pause. Zora could feel the weight of their stares, the pressure building in the room, but she didn't back down. She had come too far to turn back now. Nava spoke again, her voice thoughtful. You speak of compassion, but how do we achieve that in a galaxy that sees us as enemies? How do we lead when we've spent so long creating fear? Zora took a step forward, her heart pounding. It won't be easy, she admitted. But we can start small. We can rebuild trust, one person at a time. We can show the galaxy that WE are not just warriors, but people who care about the future. The change we seek starts with us. It starts with the Valkyra. The room was silent for a moment. Then slowly, one by one, the council members began to speak. Some were skeptical, but others seemed to be considering her words. Zora couldn't be sure if they would agree, but at least she had gotten them to listen. After a long, intense debate, the council finally reached a decision. The Valkyra would open negotiations with the other factions, focusing on peace instead of war. They would work to rebuild the trust they had lost and to offer aid to the planets affected by the conflict. Zora felt a wave of relief wash over her, but she knew it wasn't over yet. This was only the beginning. The real work was just starting. But for the first time, she could see a future where her people could change, where they could choose a different path. As the council meeting ended, Zora stepped outside, taking a deep breath of fresh air. Daniel was waiting for her, his face breaking into a smile when he saw her. You did it, he said, his voice filled with pride. Zora smiled back. But it was a smile of determination, not victory. It's not over yet, she said, but we've made a start. Now, for the first time in her life, Zora felt like she was truly on the path to something better. The weeks that followed were filled with both challenges and progress. Zora had stepped into a new role, one she had never imagined for herself. She wasn't just an outsider anymore. She was now a leader, a voice for those who had long been ignored. But with this new role came heavy responsibility. Zora spent her days meeting with leaders from different factions. She was working hard to unite them, showing them that the future didn't have to be shaped by violence and fear. Every conversation was an uphill battle, but she was determined. She could see the change beginning to take root, even if it was slow. One afternoon, Zora stood before a large group of Valkyra civilians. They had gathered in the town square, eager to hear her speak. Some were hopeful, while others were still unsure. She knew this was a crucial moment. If she couldn't show them that peace was possible, everything she had worked for might fall apart. Today, we face a choice, Zora began, her voice strong but calm. We can continue down the path of destruction, where war and power are. All that matter, or we can choose a new path, one where we work together, where we listen to each other, where we build a future that is not based on fear. The crowd was silent, hanging on her every word. Zora's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept going. She had to believe that they could make this change. For herself, for her people, for the galaxy. We've been at war for too long, she continued. Look around you. This is what we have gained. Destruction, sorrow, and loss. But it doesn't have to be this way. We have the power to change our fate. We don't need to fight for power. We can create peace. There was a murmur of agreement from the crowd, but not everyone was convinced. A voice called out from the back, filled with doubt. How do we know this peace will last? The voice asked. We've tried before and it failed. What makes you think this time will be different? Zora paused for a moment, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. She could see the fear in their eyes, the fear of change, the fear of the unknown. But she also saw something else. Hope. It was small, but it was there. This time we're not alone, she said, her voice growing stronger. We have allies now. The humans are standing with us. Together we can build a future, but it requires all of us to work together. It will take time, but if we truly want peace, we have to be patient. We have to believe in each other. Standing nearby stepped forward. Zora gave him a brief smile of gratitude before turning back to the crowd. He had been a constant support through all of this, and now his presence at her side meant more than ever. We've already started, Daniel said, his voice carrying over the crowd. The humans are ready to help, and we're here for thee. Long haul, we won't give up on you. We will fight for peace, just like Zora is. The crowd fell into a deep silence, the weight of their words sinking in. It wasn't a loud cheer, but Zora could feel the shift. She had planted the seed, and now it was up to them to nurture it. Over the next few days, Zora worked tirelessly to bring the different factions together. The Valkora were still divided. Some wanted peace, but others held tightly to the old ways. The warlords especially were not convinced. They saw peace as weakness, and they were not ready to give up their power. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Zora sat alone in a quiet corner of the village. Her mind was racing. She had made progress, but the road ahead was still filled with obstacles. It was easy to feel defeated, especially when she saw the fierce resistance from those who wanted war. But she knew she couldn't stop now, not when so many lives depended on it. Daniel joined her, sitting down beside her. "You're doing great," he said quietly. "I know it's hard, but you're making a difference." Zora smiled weakly. "Sometimes I wonder if it's enough. It feels like we're fighting against so much, against years of tradition, against the fear that's been ingrained in everyone." "You're enough," Daniel said firmly. "You've already done something that no one else was able to do. You've given them hope. And that's something they've never had before."
Zora
looked at him, grateful for his words. He always knew how to remind her why she had started this journey in the first place. It wasn't for the praise or the power. It was for the people. "I won't stop," she said quietly. "I can't stop. I've seen what war does. I've seen the cost. I won't let it destroy us. We have to believe that we can build something better." Daniel nodded. "We will. We're in this together." The next morning, Zora received an unexpected visit from Nava, the council member who had once been skeptical of her ideas. Nava had always been a quiet presence in the council, but now she seemed different. Her eyes were filled with resolve, and Zora could tell she had made a decision. "Zora," Nava began, her voice steady, "I've spoken to the other council members. Some of them are still hesitant, but there's a growing support for your vision, ready to make a change." Zora's heart skipped a beat. "You mean," Nava nodded, "we'll begin negotiations with the other factions? It's not going to be easy, but we'll start with the first steps toward peace. We need your leadership." Zora felt a surge of hope flood through her. This was it. The moment she had been working for. The council had finally heard her, and now they were ready to act. But the real work was just beginning. The road ahead would still be difficult, but Zora knew that as long as she kept fighting, she could make a difference. "Thank you," Zora said, her voice full of gratitude. "We'll do this together." And for the first time, Zora truly believed that peace was within their reach. It wasn't just a dream anymore. It was a reality. They could build if they all worked together. The days grew longer as Zora and Daniel worked tirelessly to keep the momentum going. After the council's approval of the peace talks, there was a sense of hope in the air. That hope was fragile, and every step forward felt like a battle in itself. The Valkyra were still deeply divided, and some of the warlords refused to believe in the possibility of peace. Zora's life had become a whirlwind of meetings, discussions, and negotiations. Her days were filled with hours of listening to other leaders offering suggestions and trying to convince people who were set in their ways. But through it all, Daniel remained her anchor, always by her side, reminding her of the reason they were doing this. One morning, as the sun broke through the clouds, Zora met with Nava in the council chambers. The air in the room was thick with tension, the weight of the decisions to be made pressing heavily on everyone present. The representatives from different factions were seated at the long table, their eyes filled with uncertainty. Zora stood before them, feeling the heaviness of the moment. This meeting would determine if peace would truly be possible. She had hoped that the council would be ready, but deep down, she knew that there would still be some who were reluctant to accept the new path. Na'V spoke first, her voice steady. We are here today to discuss the next steps for peace. That Valcora cannot continue down the path of war. The damage we've done to ourselves and others is irreversible if we don't change. But I must admit, there are many who still fear what lies ahead. Zora looked around the room. The warlords, sitting in silence, exchanged glances. They were still skeptical, their faces set in stone. Zora knew that convincing them wouldn't be easy. These leaders had spent their lives in the shadow of war and power. They weren't used to the idea of peace. But she had come this far, and she wasn't going to back down now. I understand your fear, Zora began, her voice calm yet firm. I know that we've always been taught that strength is found in war, but what we have learned, what I have seen, is that true strength lies in the ability to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The room was silent. Zora's words hung in the air, waiting for a response. One of the greatest strengths we have is our unity, she continued. Together, we can rebuild, but we can only do that if we choose peace. We choose to listen instead of fight. We have already seen the damage that war has done. We cannot keep making the same mistakes. One of the warlords, a tall, imposing figure named Kor, stood up, his voice filled with anger. You speak of peace, Zora, but how can you trust those who have wronged us? The other factions, the humans there, the reason we're in this mess? How do we know they will not betray us once we lower our defenses? Zora faced him, her heart racing, but her expression unwavering. She had expected this. She knew that the warlords would always see the humans as the enemy, even though they were offering help. But she also knew that Kor's fear was not the fear of the people, it was his own fear of losing control. The humans, she said, her voice firm, are not the enemy. They've shown us a better way. They've offered help, not to take power, but to work together for the good of everyone. It's not about lowering our defenses. It's about building trust. Kor sneered. Trust. You expect us to trust the humans after everything they've done? Yes, Zora replied, her voice steady, because we cannot move forward without it. If we want peace, we must be willing to take that first step. We cannot continue to live in fear, and we cannot continue to fight against an enemy that is not there. The room fell silent once more. Zora could feel the tension building, the weight of history hanging over them. But this was the moment of truth. This was where everything changed. If she didn't take this chance, if she didn't push for peace, now all their efforts would be for nothing. Let us try something different, Zora said, her voice filled with conviction. Let us work together, not as enemies, not as rivals, but as allies. If we fail, then we'll know we tried. But if we succeed, we will show the galaxy that the Valkyra are not just conquerors, they are protectors. Kor stared at her, his expression hard. But for the first time, Zora saw something in his eyes, a flicker of doubt. Perhaps, just perhaps, he was starting to understand. I will give you my support, Nava said, her voice strong. I believe in your vision, Zora, but we must be cautious. The road ahead will be difficult. There are many who will not easily accept change. Zora nodded. I know, but we have to start somewhere. We can't keep fighting the same war over and over again. The council remained quiet for a moment, the weight of the decision settling over them. Zora's heart pounded in her chest. This was the hardest part. She had to make them believe. She had to make them see that peace was possible. Finally, Kor spoke, his voice reluctant but resigned. If we do this, Zora, it's not just for the Valkyra. It's for the future. For everyone. Zora's heart skipped a beat. This was the breakthrough she had been waiting for. One by one, the council members nodded in agreement. They were willing to take that first step, to trust in something different. The room erupted in quiet murmurs as the Valkyra Council began to discuss the next steps. Zora felt a sense of relief wash over her, but she knew this was only the beginning. There would still be hard work ahead, but for the first time, she truly believed that change was within their reach. As Zora and Daniel left the council chamber, she looked up at him with a smile. "We did it." Daniel smiled back, his eyes filled with pride. "We're not done yet, but we're closer than we've ever been." Zora looked out at the horizon, a new sense of hope growing inside her. The journey ahead would be difficult, but she knew they were on the right path. And for the first time, she believed that peace was possible. The day of the peace talks arrived, and Zora could feel the weight of history pressing down on her. It wasn't just another meeting, it was the moment that would decide the future of her people. The Valkyra, once a mighty and proud race, had the chance to prove they were more than just warriors. They had the chance to show the galaxy that they could change, that they could lead through compassion and understanding. Zora stood at the front of the room, looking out over the gathering. Leaders from various factions were seated at the long table, their faces serious and filled with uncertainty. Some were allies, but many were skeptics, unsure if peace could truly be achieved. Zora's heart beat faster in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. She had come so far, and she wasn't going to let fear stand in her way now. Daniel stood beside her, his quiet presence offering support. His steady gaze reminded Zora that she wasn't alone. Together they had worked for this moment, and together they would see it through. The humans had already shown their willingness to help, and now it was time for the Valkyra to prove they could rise above their past. As Zora began to speak, her voice filled the room. "Today, we stand at a crossroads. For so long, fighting not just against others, but against ourselves. We've let fear and pride control us, and in doing so, we've lost sight of what truly matters. Our people are suffering. Our world is in ruins. But there is still hope." She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. She could feel the weight of the council's eyes upon her, some of them skeptical, others curious. This was her chance, to make them see, to make them understand that peace was the only way forward. "The old ways have failed us," she continued. "We cannot keep fighting for power, for dominance. That path has led us to destruction. We have to choose a new way. A way where we work together, where we build each other up instead of tearing each other down. Peace is not just an ideal. It is the only path to our survival." The room was silent. The leaders exchanged looks, some nodding, others still unsure. Zora's heart pounded in her chest. She knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but she also knew that this was the only chance they had. "We have the opportunity to change," Zora said, her voice growing stronger. "We have the chance to show the galaxy that the Valkyra are not just conquerors, we're protectors. We can use our strength for good. We can build a future where our people no longer live in fear, where we can help others instead of destroy them." Daniel stepped forward, his voice adding weight to her words. "The humans are ready to help," he said. "You're here to support the Valkyra, to work together toward a peaceful future. We will not force you to follow our ways, but we will stand beside you as you find your own path. Peace is possible, but it requires trust and cooperation." The tension in the room was palpable. Zora could see the council members whispering among themselves, their eyes flicking between her and Daniel. there were still many who believed that peace was a dream, a fantasy. They had lived through too much bloodshed to believe it was possible. But Zora refused to give up. She had seen what war had done to her people. She had seen the pain, the suffering, the loss. She had seen it all, and she could not ignore it anymore. If she didn't speak for her people, who would? The leader of the warlords' corps stood up. His expression was hard, his gaze filled with doubt. "You speak of peace," he said, his voice booming across the room. "But how can we trust those who have fought against us? How can we trust the humans? How do we know they won't betray us once we lower our guard?" Zora met his gaze, her eyes unflinching. She had been expecting this. Kor's fear was not just about the humans, it was about losing control. He had built his power on fear and war. But Zora knew that if she could make him see the truth, it would mean everything. "The humans have already shown us that they are different," Zora said, her voice steady. "They have helped us not to take power, but to offer support. Are here to work with us, not against us. Cannot live in fear any longer. We must trust, or we will lose everything." The room was silent again. Zora could feel the tension hanging in the air. Kor stood still, his eyes locked with hers. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Zora could see the conflict in his. Isi was struggling, torn between his fear and the possibility of change. Finally, Kor spoke. "I will agree to the peace talks," he said, his voice reluctant but firm. "But it will not be easy. You're not going to simply forget the past." Zora nodded, her heart swelling with a mixture of relief and determination. "We will not forget the past," she said. "But we cannot be defined by it. The future is ours to shape." The room erupted into quiet discussions, the leaders exchanging words, some with approval, others with doubt. Zora knew that the real work had only just begun, but for the first time, she felt a sense of hope. They had taken the first step, and that was all she needed. As the meeting came to a close, Zora and Daniel stepped outside into the bright sunlight. The air felt different now, lighter. There was still much to be done, but Zora knew they were on the right path. "We did it," Daniel said, his voice filled with quiet pride. Zora smiled. "We're just getting started." And for the first time in her life, Zora truly believed that change was possible. The Valkyra had chosen a new path, and though the road ahead would be difficult, she knew that together they could build a future of peace.